This video is brought to you by Incogni. Hello Internet, Seth Skorikowski, and today we'll be taking a look at the Cyberpunk Reddit venture, Agents of Desire. Written by Mike Pondsmith and Cody Pondsmith, it was published in 2022's collection Tales of the Red by Artelsorian Games. The adventure is fairly short, just 18 pages, and it took us 7 to 8 hours to complete. It's a mystery scenario with the player characters hired to locate a kidnapped woman, and is very light on combat, as social, technical, and stealth skills are going to be far more useful for this scenario. Now, for full disclosure, I did not run this adventure myself. I did this one as a player under my buddy George, who's been running us through an on-again, off-again Cyberpunk Red campaign, so now that we have finished this scenario and I've finally been able to read it for myself, I'm ready to give my review. And I'm Jack the NPC, or I guess in the case of adventures that Seth don't run, I'm just Jack. I'm here to give it to you from a player's side of things, as I get to find a missing woman, eat at a hoity-toity restaurant, and cross paths with the lamestly named gang of the dark future. Now, speaking of cyberpunk, let's talk about cybersecurity, which brings us to today's sponsor, Incogni. Right now, data brokers are collecting your information, gathering your name, address, date of birth, buying habits, license plate and social security numbers, political affiliations, family members, everything they can, and selling it to anyone. Marketing companies, identity thieves, scammers, burglars, anyone really. And one of the big threats here is people search sites, which can be easily accessed by harassers who might not like how you drove that one day, or might not like something that you said online and decide to come after you for it. Being an online personality myself, I find this one a bit concerning, to be honest. Now, while there are laws that do require that data brokers remove your information from their databases if you request it, the bad news is there are hundreds of data brokers out there, making it impossible for anyone to contact them all, let alone follow up with them to make sure that they actually do remove your information. That's where Incogni comes in. You simply make an account, give them permission to act on your behalf, and sit back as they go after brokers with your information and make them remove it, then follow up with them to make sure that they do. So to help keep your data away from scammers and identity thieves and stalkers, while also cutting down on your spam and robocalls, just hit the link below and use the code SETHSCORE to get 60% off an annual plan with Incogni. Let them do the work for you. Now back to the video. But before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop here. Send your referee this way to see about running the adventure for you. But if you keep going and you spoil yourself, a black ice program will fry your brain. Okay, Game Masters, let's get this one started. The adventure opens with the player characters being contacted by legendary solo-turned-fixer Rogue, who asks them to meet her at the Forlorn Hope.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! The Rogue knows who I am and wants to meet with me? Holy crap, I have been crushing on that woman since 1996. I have gotta buy some cologne and put a tie on for this meeting.
Meeting Rogue, she says that she's got a missing persons case for them, perfect for some up-and-comer edge runners like the player characters. Corpo's fiancée has been snatched, so it's possibly to strong-arm him into giving them some company secrets. Now, one thing that just warms my heart with this whole exchange is when Rogue is answering the player characters' questions, she calls them Peanut Head, a clear reference to my Bonesaw video, meaning that she's one of my subscribers.
That's really cool, man, and you should be proud of that. However, I'm a bit conflicted about this whole thing. I mean, I have been crushing on this woman for 30 years now, so to finally meet her and her start talking like the Bonesaw is just, that's not what I was expecting.
They meet the client Cody Khan at his luxury apartment. He tells them that his fiancée, Aisha Ai Tang, is missing. Now, he last saw her a couple days ago when they were having dinner at an exclusive restaurant. He stepped away to the bathroom for a couple minutes, and when he returned, she was gone. He doesn't know who would possibly wish her harm and assumes it was a plot to get to him. He mentions that he's heard of a gang in the area that's called the High Society Heist Club, and they've been operating around there, but they're known to only really steal stuff like expensive jewelry and different things like that, and not necessarily kidnappings.
You know, I noticed a nickname, and now you keep referring to her as I, and it really reminds me of those dudes now that get those AI girlfriends and think that they're real. Like, oh, they're real to me. How sad. What? What'd they say?
Yeah, we'll get to that. Now, Cody wants to keep this quiet from his employer, so he's hired these edge runners in order to find her, and he's willing to pay 1,000 euro bucks a person if they can bring her home safe.
Wow, 1,000 eddies. I mean, you were eating at a restaurant that night that cost 500 eddies a plate, and you already said that you would be willing to pay anything that the kidnappers wanted. Well, evidently anything ain't all that much.
Yeah, the fee seems a little bit light to me, too. Anyway, during this meeting, Cody gets a call on his company phone, and it's Aisha. She says that she was kidnapped and doesn't know where she is, but she's terrified and begging for him to come rescue her. Now, they hear the kidnapper's voice over the line telling her to shut up. Instead of coming on the phone and demanding payment or anything, he just simply hangs up the phone. Now, with this evidence of this was definitely a kidnapping and not just a runaway fiancé situation, Cody gives the player characters his work phone in case she calls it again. Now, personally, I find it just a little bit too convenient that Aisha calls just right at the moment the player characters arrive, right? It seems a little bit suspect. So, she was kidnapped a couple days ago. So let's say it was 2 days ago, because it never really says, and then she just happens to call right when the player characters are there. So it seems a little bit staged, and the players might think this seems a little bit staged for them. So I suggest that maybe Cody received this call and he recorded it maybe a day or so before. But game masters who do want that drama of, all of a sudden a call comes in, you could have it be a second call appears right when they're there, but it's quickly cut off by somebody there. It just seems weird that she would have waited so long to have made that initial call asking for help. So you could say that he received the first call, recorded it, and that's when he called rogue. And then the second call comes in when the player characters are coming to meet with him. Now, armed with Cody's phone, the player characters are probably going to first check out the scene of the crime, the ultra fancy French restaurant called the Lune Bleue, operating in the Upper Marina District. This place is super duper posh and fiercely protected by Maurice, the snooty maitre d', who won't let anyone inside unless they look rich, and he refuses to answer any questions about the customers, the employees, or the restaurant guests. But he's best described as the maitre d' from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, so game masters just play him just like that guy. Now, to get inside, the player characters might dress themselves up as customers, either paying the 500 eddies a plate or just simply doing a dine and dash. Now, if they look it up beforehand, they can learn that there is a waiter position that's recently opened up there, as one of their other waiters had quit on the same night of Aisha's abduction, and some good roles might be able to land them a job there if they apply there, and that could get them a little bit deeper inside the inner workings of the restaurant. Now, once they can inside, maybe they can ask around, they might be able to get access to the camera logs from that night, or even any information on the waiter that suspiciously left at the same time, maybe find out who he was and where he went. However, one of the waitresses there, named Jane, is also a member of the high society heist crew, and she's kind of looking out to make sure that nobody's asking around too much about them. And if she notices the player character snooping around, she's going to plant a stolen phone on one of the player characters, claim that she saw the player character steal it, and get the character arrested. But if the player characters spot her planting the phone, they might be able to ask her very politely what it is that she knows. Personally, I also suggest that game masters allow the players to make a human perception roll to notice Jane kind of listening in and sizing them up before she makes her move. The Avenger makes a big point that she is not a hardened criminal and she's going to quickly crack if she's interrogated, so I think it's fair that they might notice her, from across the room, panic when she first sees them asking around about Kevin and trying to figure out what it is she's supposed to do, so maybe the player characters can ID her before she's able to make a move on them if they make a good roll for it.
Now, when we did this, we didn't do any of that stuff. Instead, we just dressed up real nice and we snuck in through the back door. And then once a netrunner got close enough, he checked into the system and downloaded all the security footage and employee database, and we were out of there in under 5 minutes. But before we left, he went ahead and reserved us an all-expense-paid dinner for the following week, completely paid for by Cody's business account. Serves that cheap jerk right for only offering us $1,000 to find his missing girlfriend.
Reviewing the security footage from the night of the abduction is going to show that Cody was eating alone that night, but ordering a dinner and wine for two, and he's talking like someone is there, but nobody's there at all. Now, a few good rolls can verify that the footage has not been altered altered, and Aisha is not there, and no one else but Cody even acts like she is. Now eventually he gets up and he goes to the restroom, and a waiter named Kevin swipes Cody's phone off the table. So when Cody returns from the restroom, he freaks out, wondering where his girlfriend is. Now the waiter Kevin, his phone has been disconnected, and the address that he had on file is just a completely bogus address to a building that was burned down years ago. Now what's going on here is back before the Fourth Corporate War, Cody and Aisha met and fell in love while they were both working at Arasaka. After the war, they found new jobs at separate companies. And jealous and worried that she might find somebody else at her new job and leave him, Cody blackmailed a former Arasaka techie named Lotus to murder Aisha with a soul killer program that burned out her brain, but copied her personality to an AI. The AI was then loaded onto Cody's phone, and with some special cyber optics that were set up for him, Cody can see Aisha as if she's really there. Now, to his horror, once he realized what he had done, this drove him cyber psycho, and he honestly does not remember the fact that he murdered her, but he believes that she's completely real, and he's been living with this delusion now for well over a decade. But when the waiter Kevin stole the phone off the table, Cody perceived it as Aisha being kidnapped rather than his phone being missing. Meanwhile, Kevin has figured out what it is that he has, and he started making copies and copies of Aisha in hope of selling off all these AIs. He's a low-level pickpocket guy that just really got lucky with a big score. Now, the player characters can figure all this out a few different ways. Researching Aisha finds that she hasn't worked for the company that Cody says that she worked for in over 12 years. And a really great search of the scrubbed records is going to discover that her body was discovered over a decade before her neuralware burned out by a cyber attack. Now, personally, I also suggest that game masters give a bonus to this search if the player characters have already learned that she hasn't been working for her company in over a decade, as that can narrow down the search window to around the time that the body was discovered. So that way, if they're making multiple rolls, it can kind of help each other out. Now, maybe they're going to interrogate Jane, who can tell them where Kevin is. Aisha might call Cody's phone asking for help, which of course the player characters have it, and she might tell the player characters that Cody's phone was given to some guy for some custom upgrades by a techie named Lotus, and that can tip them off as far as Lotus being involved in all this. They might return Cody's apartment, breaking in when he's not at home, and they can find a few things if they do that, such as an old picture when they worked at Arasaka together. I also suggest that if they do break into his computer, they might find some records or correspondences with Lotus, who's been doing regular updates and upgrades to Cody's phones and cyberware over all these years. He's not walking around with a 10-year-old phone. Now, maybe they could find some reference to the blackmail, and I feel it's a really missed opportunity if they don't find anything about Lotus in Cody's apartment, because right now there really isn't anything to find. Meanwhile, Kevin, who realizes that he's got something much bigger than he thought it was, he's hired a local gang called the Saturday Night Butt Kickers to deal with anyone who's asking around or visiting Cody's apartment. So if the player characters do decide to break in and they discover the clue that Aisha might be just some sort of delusion in Cody's head, the gang is going to kick open the door and attack them.
The Saturday Night Butt Kickers? Holy crap! I have met some lame gangs in my day, but that name takes the cake. I am obligated to kick their asses off that name alone. Fortunately, I ain't gotta lift a finger for this one because this apartment is protected by a ground drone.
What's weird is the ground drone is said to only come out and attack if the player characters are in the apartment and they're doing something that's clearly illegal, like smashing the place up or stealing something. However, there's no mention of it all or of anything about the apartment's regular security when the gangers come busting in. Either when the player characters are there, or they might break in while Cody is away and ransack the place, and Cody calls them on the phone saying that somebody broke into his place while he was gone and they need to come, check it out and help him out. So this drone seems to only be a thing if the player characters are the ones that try robbing the place.
Really? I mean, between the rich cheapskate that's only paying us with the change that he found at his couch cushion, and the fact that this armed drone only seems to attack if we're the ones that try robbing this place, I can't help but feel that this adventure is trying really hard to keep the player characters poor.
Maybe. Now, game masters definitely remember this drone. If the Saturday Night Butt Kickers break into this place, maybe it chases them off shortly after they get there, or when no one's there, maybe and they're in the apartment, they come kicking in the door at some dramatic moment, right? The player characters, they got the clues in their hand, and all of a sudden the door flies open, and there they are. Then they have about 2 rounds of combat, and all of a sudden this panel in the wall opens up, and the Murderbot 9000 comes clomping in, and now everyone is scrambling to get out as machine gun fire starts blasting up the walls, tearing up the place, and now they're diving behind couches and everything trying to get out of the way. Now maybe it was because of this that our game master, when he ran it, he had the butt kickers try to jump us on our way to Kodai's apartment because we were just going to drop by and visit him and ask him some questions. Rather than wait for us to go ahead and break in inside of it, he said that the butt kickers couldn't get past the security that was in the lobby, and they jumped us in an alley right outside the place. And then once we got everything from them, we never even went to his apartment, so we never even broke into it when we played it. Now, eventually the player characters are going to figure out the location of the server farm that Aisha is in. Now, maybe they'll find out that information from the waitress Jane when maybe they question the gangers, or they find a burner phone on one of their bodies. The heist crew, realizing that this job was way more dangerous than they were wanting, or that they are even prepared for, they've already abandoned this place. So getting the phone with Aisha on it is pretty easy once they get inside. Now, what they do about all the servers with hundreds and hundreds of copies of a sentient AI begging them for help, that is a completely different matter. So what happens next is completely up to the player characters. Maybe they give Aisha back to Cody, collect their reward, and let him continue living out his fantasy. Maybe they confront him about Aisha's murder, forcing him to realize and admit what it was that he's done. Maybe they just turn everything over to the police and have them deal with it. All of this makes for a really good moral dilemma because, there's also the question, if they don't give Cody back his phone, they're not going to get paid. So they might do the right thing and turn him into the cops, but that also means that they're not going to get a payday for that. Overall, I really dug this adventure. It's a pretty good investigative scenario with some very cyberpunk twists to it. What we had originally suspected might be some high-tech phishing attempt with an AI girlfriend ended up being a whole lot darker than that. Though I do have a few suggestions for any game masters out there that might want to run this for their own group. First, the Fourth Corporate War began in 2021, so maybe mention that Cody is at least in his mid to late 40s by the time I read. So, biosculpting and the like, that might disguise his age, make him look a lot younger than he really is, but I also think it'd be really cool if all the pictures of him and Aisha, she's clearly in her late 20s, early 30s, and then maybe they have some different pictures around the place, like maybe he's photoshopped him into them, like different vacation photos and whatnot over the years, and any keen observers might notice this age gap between them, how over time it seems to be getting wider and wider and wider because he's aging while clearly she's not. Now, the scenario could really use a timeline of events, not just for when Aisha was killed off, because that's kind of vague, it's somewhere between 10 and 12 years ago, but also between the phone being stolen and the player characters getting hired to find her. Next, I'd like a good way to introduce Lotus outside of having Aisha tell the player characters about him. Maybe something in Kodai's apartment, such as records of appointments in Kodai's calendar over the last 10 years, making a note that he has to take Aisha to Lotus for upgrades, or different correspondences that are hidden in his computer, or maybe even the original blackmail material that was used to get Lotus to do this. Maybe if the player characters get stuck, maybe Cody can remember Lotus long enough to suggest that the player characters might want to find him, might try to find this guy, because he might not even know why. He just knows that Lotus could be somehow helpful in this. Or, maybe he remembers that he wronged Lotus at some point in the past. He doesn't remember exactly what he did that wronged Lotus, but maybe Lotus is out for revenge, and maybe he's a suspect. Or maybe Cody realizes that Lotus would know how to trace the phone. He might not consciously realize that it's the phone that Lotus knows how to trace because he's the one that's been upgrading it, so he might tell the player characters that Lotus might know how to trace Aisha, and that way the player characters, they can find Lotus, and Lotus can be like, what are you talking about? And then maybe they can find out what's going on with the phone and the AI and all of that. Now, another good way that you might be able to bring Lotus in is after they find Aisha. They might be able to inspect this upgraded phone now that they've been able to get their hands on it, and a really good techie might even recognize the signature work of a legendary and mysterious techie out there named Lotus, who definitely was the one that did these upgrades. Personally, I like that as an option because it allows us to use tech skills in an interesting way rather than just the player characters making tech. It's a good way of analyzing the tech that other people have made or worked on.
Also, don't call her Ai. I mean, that is just too big and too obvious of a blatant hint right there. Calling Aisha is perfectly fine.
You can find Tales of the Red on the Artelsorian website or as a PDF on DriveThruRPG, links below. It's a fun adventure and definitely worth checking out.
Hey, thanks for watching. Enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews or how-tos, just hit that subscribe button. And a huge thank you to Incogni for sponsoring this video. Till next time, Choombas, you have a great day. You know, with Artelsorian Games now referencing 2 different war story videos in their books, with the Scott Brown incident in the core book and now the Bonesaw referenced in this book, I'm wondering what the next war story video they're going to reference is. Personally, I hope it's the one about your first TPK, because that was freaking hilarious. Either that, or that Cyberpunk game where they accidentally kill somebody with a bonsai tree. That one deserves recognition.